Hello, students. Today we'll be doing a new story called The Enemy, written by Pearl S. Buck. Children, since this story is too long, so I'll be dividing this story into parts, and for each part, you have to listen to my audio. So let's begin. This story is set during the Second World War, and a Japanese doctor finds an American POW at his doorstep. He is in dilemma that being a doctor, should he save the wounded man, or being a Japanese, should he hand over the enemy to the army? Okay, so I'll read out the paragraph. Please follow the explanation also. Dr. Sadao Hoke's house was built on a spot of the Japanese coast where, as a little boy, he had often played. The low, square stone house was set upon rocks well above a narrow beach that was outlined with bent pines. As a boy, Sadao had climbed the pines, supporting himself on his bare feet, as he had seen men do in the South Seas when they climbed for coconuts. His father had taken him often to the islands of those seas, and never had he failed to say to the little brave boy at his side, "Those islands yonder, they are the stepping stones to the future for Japan." "Where shall we step from them?" Sadao had asked seriously. "Who knows?" his father had answered. "Who can limit our future? It depends on what we make it." Please underline the word yonder. That means at some distance in the direction pointed at. So here the writer introduces the main character of this story, Dr. Sadao Hoke, whose house was situated on the coast of Japan. He had been living there since his childhood. The house had a low height and was made of stone. So it was set upon the rocky beach, which had a boundary line made with pine trees that were tilted towards one side. When Dr. Sadao was a child, he would climb up the pine trees. Okay, on his visit to the South Seas, he would see men do so in order to get coconuts from the trees. So he would accompany his father to the islands of the South Seas often. His father would point out towards the islands and would say that those were the stepping stones towards the future of Japan. Now Dr. Sadao would question him childishly that where would they reach from those islands? Okay. So his father would reply that it was not known, as it depended on the future. The future had no limits. It depended on the mankind, how it shaped its future. Now I'll move further. Sadao had taken this into his mind, as he did everything his father said. His father, who never joked or played with him, but who spent infinite pains upon him, who was his only son. Sadao knew that his education was his father's chief concern. For this reason, he had been sent at 22 to America to learn all that could be learned of surgery and medicine. He had come back at 30, and before his father died, he had seen Sadao become famous not only as a surgeon but as a scientist. Because he was perfecting a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, he had not been sent abroad with the troops. Also, he knew there was some slight danger that the old general might need an operation for a condition for which he was now being treated medically, and for this possibility Sadao was being kept in Japan. In this paragraph, the writer says that Sadao retained all the things that his father would tell him as a child. His father never played or joked with him. Okay, and although they shared a mature and very good relation, and his father underwent a lot of hardships to bring him up, Sadao knew that his father was concerned about his education. He was sent to America at the age of 22 to study surgery and medicine. He returned at the age of 30. Before dying, Sadao's father saw Sadao becoming famous not only as a surgeon but also as a scientist. Sadao was on his way to discover a treatment for wounds which would make them absolutely clean. So he was not sent abroad with the armed forces as a doctor. Also, he was retained in Japan because the old general was suffering from an ailment which needed to be operated open in case of an emergency. Now, next paragraph we'll move on to clouds were rising from the ocean now. The unexpected warmth of the past few days had at night drawn heavy fog from the cold waves. Sadao watched mists hide outlines of a little island near the shore and then come creeping up the beach below the house, wreathing around the pines. In a few minutes, fog would be wrapped about the house too. Then he would go into the room where Hannah, his wife, would be waiting for him with the two children. The writer describes in the scene outside Dr. Sadao's house here. As the days were unusually warm and the sea waves were cold, the nights became foggy. Dr. Sadao saw the boundary of a nearby island became invisible gradually as it got covered in the mist. Slowly, the mist was coming closer to him. Soon there would be mist all around his house. And at that time, he would go back into the house to his wife Hannah, who was waiting for him along with their two children. Now, next paragraph says, but at this moment the door opened and she looked out. A dark blue woolen hurry over her kimono. She came to him affectionately and put her arm through his as he stood, smiled, and said nothing. He had met Hannah in America, but he had waited to fall in love with her until he was sure she was Japanese. His father would never have received her unless she had been pure in her race. He wondered often whom he would have married if he had not met Hannah, and by what luck he had found her in the most casual way, by chance literally, at an American professor's house. The professor and his wife had been kind people, anxious to do something for their few foreign students, and the students, though bored, had accepted this kindness. Sadao had often told Hannah how nearly he had not gone to Professor Harley's house that night. The rooms were so small, the food so bad, the professor's wife so voluble. But he had gone, and there he had found Hannah, a new student, and had felt he would love her if it were at all possible. Haori means here a loose outer garment worn over the kimono, and what kimono is, it's a traditional Japanese garment. So in this paragraph the writer says that before Sadao could go inside, the door opened and his wife looked out for him. She was wearing a dark blue colored gown over her dress. She lovingly crossed her arm with his, with him and with his, and smiled at him, and remained silent and stood by him. They had met in America. These two, Sadao and Hannah, they met in America and where they were studying. So Sadao knew that his father would marry him to a Japanese girl only, and so he ensured this before falling in love with her. Sadao considered himself to be lucky to have accidentally met her at an American professor's house. He wondered that had he not met her, he would not have got a wife all his life. He thought that the professor and his wife were kind as they were keen to help foreign students. He was glad that they had accepted this kindness and went to their house because it was there that he had met Hannah. Sadao would often tell Hannah that it was a mere coincidence that he went to the professor's house that night, as the rooms in his house were small, the food was not good, and the professor's wife was very talkative. If he had not gone there that night, he would not have met Hannah. At that time, Hannah was a student. Sadao had thought that he would love her if at all it would be possible for him. Now he felt her hand on his arm and was aware of the pleasure it gave him. even though they had been married years enough to have the two children, for they had not married heedlessly in America. They had finished their work at school and had come home to Japan, and when his father had seen her, the marriage had been arranged in the old Japanese way, although Sadao and Hannah had talked everything over beforehand. They were perfectly happy. She laid her cheek against his arm. Heedlessly, here please you underline, which means carelessly. Now, in this paragraph, Sadao and Hannah loved each other even after having two children, after many years of marriage. They have, very strong bonding. They had not married in haste in America. Rather, they returned to Japan, sought permission from their parents, and then got married in a very traditional Japanese ceremony. They had discussed all the details before the wedding, because somewhere Sadao also knew that his father will not agree for any informal kind of things. So when they came back to Japan, they were, after getting married, they were very happy with each other. Hannah rested her cheek against Sadao's arm with affection. It was at this moment that both of them saw something black come out of the mists. It was a man. He was flung up out of the ocean. Flung, it seemed, to his feet by a breaker. He staggered a few steps, his body outlined against the mists, his arms above his head. Then the curled mist hid him again. Underline the word staggered, which means to walk unsteadily as if about to fall. So, in that moment, they saw a figure appear out of the mist. It appeared black in color due to the mist in the air. Okay, the outline of a man's body was visible in the mist. He walked unsteadily with his arms above the head. It was an indication that he was a prisoner. The man walked a few steps and then disappeared again in the mist. "Who is that?" Hannah cried. She dropped Sadao's arm and they both leaned over the railing of the veranda. Now they saw him again. The man was on his hands and knees crawling. Then they saw him fall on his face and lie there. Leaned means to bend forward. So upon seeing the figure, Hannah reacted by asking that who was that? She took her arm out of Sadao's arm and both of them bent forward over the railing of the veranda to have a closer look at the man. They saw him again. He was crawling on his hands and knees. Then he fell on his face and kept on lying there. Probably he had fainted. "A fisherman, perhaps," Sadao said, "washed away from his boat." He ran quickly down the steps and behind him Hannah came, her wide sleeves flying. A mile or two away on either side there were fishing villages, but here was only the bare and lonely coast, dangerous with rocks. The surf beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. Somehow the man had managed to come through them. He must be badly torn. Underline the word spiked, which means covered with sharp points. So, as the area had villages full of fishermen, Sadao said that probably it was a fisherman who had been washed off his boat. So he ran to help him down and Hannah also followed him. The loose sleeves of her houri flew as she ran. Okay, this part of the coast was not inhabited as it had dangerous rocks on it. As the rocks were pointed, the man could be badly injured, although he had managed to come through them. Now, they saw when they came toward him that indeed it was so. The sand on one side of him had already a stain of red soaking through. A stain of red means blood stain. So, as the Japanese couple saw the man, they realized that he was badly injured. The sand on which he lay had blood stains on one side, which indicated that he was wounded. Now, the next paragraph says, "He is wounded," Sadao exclaimed. He made haste to the man, who lay motionless, his face in the sand. An old cap stuck to his head, soaked with sea water. He was in wet rags of garments. Sadao stopped Hannah at his side, and turned the man's head. They saw the face. "A white man," Hannah whispered. Sadao said that the man was wounded. He approached the man, who lay motionless, with his face buried in the sand. An old cap hung on his head. It was soaked with the sea water. His dress was also wet and torn. Obviously, he was coming from the seashore. That's why it was wet. Sadao turned the man's head, and they saw the face. And Hannah spoke confidentially that he was a white man, that is an American. Now the next paragraph says, yes, it was a white man. The wet cap fell away, and there was his wet yellow hair, long, as though for many weeks it had not been cut, and upon his young and tortured face was a rough yellow beard. He was unconscious and knew nothing that they did for him. In this paragraph, the writer says that the injured man was obviously an American, and his cap fell off, and then they saw his wet yellow colored hair which had not been cut for a long time. He was young. His face had such marks which indicated that he had been tortured. He had a rough, unkempt yellow colored beard. So as he had fainted, he did not know of the presence of Sadao and Hannah. Now next paragraph says, now Sadao remembered the wound, and with his expert fingers he began to search for it. Blood flowed freshly at his touch. On the right side of his lower back, Sadao saw that a gun wound had been reopened. The flesh was blackened with powder. Sometime not many days ago, the man had been shot and had not been tended. It was bad chance that the rock had struck the wound. Tended means cared or looked after. So here Sadao was reminded that the man was wounded, as he had seen blood stains on the sand. As he was a doctor, he moved his trained fingers around the man's back to search for the wound. He felt blood oozing out of a wound in the lower part of his back. And he understood it was a gunshot. So the man had been injured a few days ago, and he had not got any medical help to treat the wound, as he had himself used some black colored powdery substance on it. The sharp rocks on the shore had pierced it, and so it was bleeding. Oh, how is he bleeding? Hannah whispered again in a solemn voice. The mist screened them now completely, and at this time of day no one came by. The fishermen had gone home, and even the chance beachcombers would have considered the day at the end. Solemn means serious and concerned. Beachcomber means a vagrant who makes a living by searching beaches for articles of value and selling them. So Hannah was concerned that the man was injured and said in a very low voice that he was bleeding. The mist had intensified now, and the three of them could not be spotted by anyone. Moreover, the fishermen and the rag pickers did not visit the place at that time of the day. After this, "What shall we do with this man?" Sadao muttered. But his trained hands seemed of their own will to be doing what they could do, to stanch the fearful bleeding. He packed the wound with the sea moss that strewed the beach. The man moaned with pain in his stupor, but he did not awaken. Muttered means speak in a low voice. Stanch means to stop or restrict here a flow of blood from a wound. Then a sea moss is a kind of seaweed. Okay, now another word you underline, strewed, which means to be scattered untidily over a place or area. Moaned means a low cry in pain, and stupor means a state of being unconscious or in an unconsciousness state. So another paragraph says the best thing that we could do would be to put him back in the sea, Sadao said, answering himself. Now that the bleeding was stopped for the moment, he stood up and dusted the sand from his hands. Yes, undoubtedly, that would be best, Hannah said steadily. But she continued to stare down at the motionless man. If we sheltered a white man in our house, we should be arrested, and if we turned him over as a prisoner, he would certainly die, Sadao said. The kindest thing would be to put him back into the sea, Hannah said. But neither of them moved. They were staring with a curious repulsion upon the inert figure. Repulsion means a strong dislike, inert means motionless. So, in this last paragraph of this audio, the writer says that Sadao answered to himself that the best thing was to put the man back into the sea. As the bleeding stopped, he stood up and removed the dust from his hands. Hannah supported his opinion, but looked intently at the man as he lay still. Sadao said that if they gave him shelter, they would be arrested for sheltering an enemy. And if they handed him over to Japanese army as a prisoner, then he would die in the prison. So as he thought that both the options were not favorable at all, so the best option was to put him back into the sea. Hannah added that the kindest act for them was to put him back into the sea. Both of them did not move ahead to do so. Rather, they stared at the motionless figure with dislike. They disliked him because he was an enemy, an American. What is he? Hannah whispered. There is something about him that looks American, Sadao said. He took up the battered cap. Yes, they are almost gone, was the faint lettering. A sailor, he said, from an American warship. He spelled it out. U.S. Navy. The man was a prisoner of war. Battered means torn and worn out. So, here, Hannah was inquisitive as she asked about the man's identity. Sadao replied that he appeared to be an American. He picked up the torn cap which was lying there and read the words written on it, which were slightly visible. He said that the man was a sailor from an American warship and read out the words U.S. Navy written on the cap. They concluded that the man had been taken into the captivity during the war. He has escaped, Hannah cried softly, and that is why he is wounded. In the back, Sadao agreed. Sadao and Hannah here discussed that the man had tried to escape from the prison and had been shot in the back. They hesitated, looking at each other. Then Hannah said with resolution, Come, are we able to put him back into the sea? They were not able to gather the courage here to throw him into the sea. Hannah called upon Sadao with firmness. She asked him if he was ready to put him back into the sea. If I am able, are you? Asked. Sadao asked. No, Hannah said, but if you can do it alone. So, no, she was very confused. Both the couples were confused. Here Sadao told her that if he was able to do so, that putting him back into the sea, and asked that did Hannah have the courage for it. So Hannah replied in the negative, and added and that if he could not do it by himself, then she had to help him. Now Sadao hesitated again. The strange thing is, he said, that if the man were whole, I could turn him over to the police without difficulty. I care nothing for him. He is my enemy. All Americans are my enemy, and he is only a common fellow. You see how foolish his face is. But since he is wounded, so here Sadao was reluctant in throwing the man into the sea. He reasoned that if the man was well, he would hand him over to the police without any hesitation. But he further added that he was not concerned about the man, but and considered him to be an enemy as he was an American. He commented that injured man was a common man as his face looked as if he was a foolish person. He wanted to say actually that he was not bothered about the injured man, but his only concern was that he was wounded. And the irony is he was a doctor. This Mr. Sadao was a doctor. So here another paragraph says, "You also cannot throw him back to the sea," Hannah said. "Then there is only one thing to do. We must carry him into the house." So here Hannah said that if he could not throw him into the sea, then the second option was to carry him home. "But the servants?" Sadao inquired. "So we must simply tell them that we intend to give him to the police, as indeed we must, Sadao. We must think of the children and your position. It would endanger all of us if we did not give this man over as a prisoner of war." "Certainly," Sadao agreed. "I would not think of doing anything else." So Sadao was concerned that the servants would, Sadao was more concerned that the servants would object as they would shelter an enemy. And Hannah said that they would tell them that they intended to hand over him to the police once he recovers. She told him that they must do that. She added that they must consider their children's future and Sadao's position. If they did not hand over a prisoner of war to the police, they would be in danger. Sadao replied that certainly he would do so, and he did not think of doing anything else. Thus agreed, together they lifted the man. He was very light, like a fowl that had been half starved for a long time until it was only feathers and skeleton. So his arms hanging, they carried him up the steps and into the side door of the house. This door opened into a passage, and down the passage they carried the man towards an empty bedroom. Fowl means cock or hen. So Sadao and Hannah lifted the injured man into the house. He was very light. The writer compares his weight to that of a hen that has not been fed for a long time, and its body loses flesh and reduces it into mere feathers and skeleton. So the man's arms were hanging, and the couple carried him up the steps into the side door of the house. The door opened into a passage, and they went down the passage towards an empty room. Now the next line says, "It had been the bedroom of Sadao's father, and since his death it had not been used. They laid the man on the deeply matted floor. Everything here had been Japanese to please the old man, who would never in his own home sit on a chair or sleep in a foreign bed." Hannah went to the wall cupboards and slid back a door and took out a soft quilt. She hesitated. The quilt was covered with flowered silk, and the lining was pure white silk. So the bedroom belonged to Sadao's father and had not been used after his death. So this injured man was laid on the thick mat on the floor. Now here the writer has described the room, that everything here in this room, first of all, this room belongs to Sadao's father, and everything was Japanese, and this Sadao's father disliked the foreign things. Hannah went to the cupboard in the wall and took a soft quilt. She resisted putting it on the injured man. Obviously it was clean, and this man was badly injured and dirty. So she resisted putting it on the injured man. The quilt was made of silk and had a flowery print on it, and the lining was made of pure white silk. "He is so dirty," she murmured in distress. "Yes, he had better be washed," Sadao agreed. "If you will fetch hot water, I will wash him." Here distress means sadness. She was sad and spoke slowly that the man was very dirty, and Sadao said that the man had to be washed here. So Sadao asked Hannah to get some hot water so that he could wash the man. "I cannot bear for you to touch him," she said. We shall have to tell the servants he is here. I will tell Yumi now. She can leave the children for a few minutes and she can wash him. Hannah did not want that Sadao should touch the man. She said that they would ask the servant to wash the injured man. She said she would call Yumi, the maid, the servant, to leave attending the children for a few minutes and wash him. Sadao considered a moment. Let it be so, he agreed. You tell Yumi and I will tell the others. But the utter pallor of the man's unconscious face moved him first to stoop and feel his pulse. It was faint, but it was there. He put his hand against the man's cold breast. The heart, too, was yet alive. Pallor means an unhealthy, pale appearance. Stoop means to bend forward. Pulse means the heartbeat. So, here in this last part of the audio, Sadao thought for a moment and then agreed with Hannah. And he asked her to call Yumi, the servant, while he would call the other servants. Before he could go out, he saw the injured man's face. It was so pale that he stooped, bent forward, and felt his heartbeat to see if he was alive. The heartbeat was very faint, but it was there. Then Sadao placed his hand on the man's heart to feel it. It was also beating. Sadao concluded thus that the injured man was alive. So students, this until here we'll be doing. Next part is in the next audio. We'll be continuing with that.